We'll get started. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Ellen Rathje. I'm the Principal Investigator for DesignSafe and a geotechnical engineering professor here at the University of Texas at Austin. I appreciate everyone's attending this webinar. I've done it now for, I think, the last few years in September to give you an update on some of the new things that we've developed over the past year in DesignSafe, and also talk a little bit about what we're doing going into the future. So a couple of housekeeping things before I get started. First of all, if you look down at the bottom of the Zoom screen, since we're in webinar mode, you'll see a Q&A as well as a chat button. If you have any questions, please pose them in the Q&A. Everyone will be able to see your question if you put it in Q&A. The chat only goes to myself and Natalie, and so we want to make sure everyone can sees the questions. And I really would like to encourage you to ask any and all questions about things I talk about, as well as maybe other things you're interested in, so that I can address any issues or thoughts and questions about DesignSafe. The second thing is we now do a survey, a post-webinar survey to kind of evaluate our training, make improvements as we go forward. And so you will get an email with a link for that webinar survey. But at the end, I'm also going to put up a QR code, and Natalie will put it in the chat window so that you can just click on the link and do the Qualtrics survey right before you even leave. And that really helps us improve what we're doing. For an example, one of the things that has come up through the surveys is folks wanting more than our webinars when we start doing deeper dives into topics, but shorter than, say, a 3-day workshop. So we're looking into, say, putting together some half-day workshops. So those are the type of feedback we get from those surveys, and they're really helpful as we plan our training. All right, so with that, I'm going to get started. Let me share my screen. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I am going to share my screen. I don't see what I thought I was going to see. There we go. I was going to share the application, but I will just share this. All right. Okay, what's new in DesignSafe? Well, we have a lot of things to talk about today. I'm going to use this webinar as both a way to talk to seasoned DesignSafe users about what's new, but also some of you may be relatively new to DesignSafe, perhaps in the last year. So I am going to, back up and talk about some of the broader issues as well and capabilities, so some of you may be familiar with that. So of course, starting off at the very top, what is DesignSafe? If you're here, you're probably a registered user, so you know the answer to this question. It's a web-based research platform that we hope will help you perform transformative research that ultimately will protect human life and reduce damage during natural hazard events. That's our broader goal of not only DesignSafe, but NHERI. And our vision for DesignSafe in particular is to foster a cultural shift within our research community towards the pervasive use of cyber infrastructure to enable that transformative research, and also the ubiquitous publishing and reuse of data. And to achieve that vision, we provide 3 basic functionalities: a platform for data sharing and publishing. We'll talk a bit about our data depot. We want to enable research workflows and provide access to high performance computing, and then also deliver cloud-based tools that support the data analysis, visualization, and data integration. That is a big part of the work that we do. So if you go to the DesignSafe website today, you'll see something like this. If you've been around DesignSafe for a while, you know that we did a redesign over the last year or so. So this looks a little bit different than you might have recalled. In a couple of housekeeping issues, you'll notice the topics at the top have changed. But most importantly, now the workspace really encompasses everything that DesignSafe provides in terms of tools, data, etc. So I'm going to focus predominantly on the workspace and a little bit on the learning center. So let's move on. So if we look at the workspace, this is where you can access kind of our main components. The first being our data repository called the Data Depot. And that's where not only you have access to published data sets, but also any of your working files that you may be working on before publishing. We have our tools and applications section, and that's where our tools and that run on the HPC systems are available, as well as various cloud-based tools. Another component that's relevant to the work we do in natural hazards is the Reconnaissance portal. It really represents a mechanism to find data that are associated with natural hazard events. So I'll talk a bit about that. And then we've got our user guides, which we did a complete redesign and reorg this year. And then all the tutorials and training are found under the Learning Center. So kind of diving a little bit more into the workspace. Again, many of you know this, but our data repository includes different segments and components where you as a user have your private space, where you just have folder access and you can upload and work on data there in your private My Data space. The My Project space is the collaboration space. That's where you can share with team members, and that's ultimately where data gets published. Then when it's published, it ends up in the publicly accessible area called Published, and that's our curated data. And then we also do have community data, which is for kind of the uncurated data. Sometimes we think of it as the wild, wild west of data files, but they are publicly accessible. The tools and applications, that's where you can do computational simulation, data analysis, visualization. And the key there is all those tools and applications have access to all the files that are in the Data Depot. And then, as I mentioned, the Reconnaissance portal, where you can find field data associated with various natural hazard events. So in terms of the main topics that I'm going to talk about today with respect to what's new, I'll first focus on the Data Depot, some functionalities we've added in response to user ideas with respect to amends and revisions, knowing that things are sometimes need to be revised in the Data Depot. Talk a little bit about what we're doing for you in terms of data metrics and providing feedback. We've also had some work in and initiatives to incentivize data publishing and data reuse. I'll show you the upgraded user guide. We'll talk a bit more about the Jupyterhub and what we have added in terms of customization, workflows, and how we're trying to use our use cases to foster continued use and enhanced use of the Jupyterhub. Then we'll move on to some Reconnaissance portal topics. HazMapper, our mapping application, Taggit, which is a new application that will help you tag photos, and then integration with Streetview. Now that we know many of you are using Streetview to collect data after events, in particular also the RAPID facility. Then I'll move on and talk a bit about the DesignSafe Summer Academy and Hackathon, a very successful event we just had this past summer, and then some of the initiatives that will follow on in the next year. So here's our Data Depot. Again, you likely have seen this before. These are the private spaces that you have. And then once you publish your data from my projects, it ends up in the published section. And you can see these are simply the projects that I'm involved with, some of which have been published, some of which have not had data published. When you look at a published data set, here's an example of something Scott Brandenburg published a couple of years ago. You'll see something that looks like a research paper in terms of authors, DOI, keywords, description. And then as you scroll down, you'll see the organized tags and files that you can use in your research if you were then wanted to use these data in your own research. There's the DOI, that's really important. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how these DOI should be used. We see a lot of papers using published data and they're not citing the DOIs correctly. So I think it's really important for us to give credit where credit is due with respect to published data. So I'll talk a bit about that. And then so a couple of things that are new that you may have noticed. You can now download the entire data set. So with one click of the button, so you can download the entire data set. We do have to realize some of these data sets are huge, and so perhaps shouldn't be fully downloaded, but that is one way to get a full download of a project. The other is the data metrics. There's something that we've just added this past year. So I almost talk about this in every DesignSafe presentation I give, how to make your data count, how to make your research reproducible and your data reusable. Of course, DesignSafe allows you to formally publish your data set. And I would encourage you not only to publish data, but processing scripts, visualizations, etc. I'll show you some examples as we go through this presentation today. You want to have a DOI. So I've clearly shown you that DesignSafe provides a DOI, as do many other data repositories, to show the value of curated data sets. In fact, I list them on my CV, just like papers. And in fact, anything with a DOI you should think of as just like a paper. And that means when you write a paper and you want to cite that you use published data, you should treat it like a paper. So put the data publication in your reference list, not in the acknowledgements, not in the data resources section, not in the narrative. You can put it there, but also put it in the reference list using the citation language that we provide. So here's an example in a paper that I published where here's the text from the paper. This looks like it's just a paper citation, but then if you go to the references section, in fact, there's authors, year, title, and the DOI. And I will also say, make sure when you get your paper proofs back that they didn't change this. It's pretty well changed now. The journals are on board, but for a while they did not like DOIs for data sets, but they're coming around. And so in our efforts to help you with that, you can see that in every published data set, you'll find this blue button where you can see the exact citation, not just the DOI. You've got the authors, the year, the title, the DOI, and you can copy and paste it right from this window or download it as a file. So now let's talk about some of those user-facing enhancements that have been developed in the last year. Very important one is the concept of amends and versioning. So in both of these cases, your DOI does not change. That's really important. This should be a permanent digital object identifier. But you may have different versions of a specific data set. Why? You may correct some errors. You may enhance the documentation. You may add data products. You actually may change some of the data analysis. For instance, you submit a paper that references this data, and the paper reviews come back. They ask you to look at some other analyses and different interpretations. You can then change the data set or upload the revised data set and publish it again. The important thing is that all versions will remain available in DesignSafe. So that means if someone actually in a paper says, I use version 1 of this data set, someone can go to DesignSafe at that DOI and see version 1. Or if the paper says we use version 2, they'll see version 2. So all of that information is there. Now we have a separate thing called amends, which may sound similar, but this does not change the version of the data set. It just allows you to modify the metadata associated with the data set. So for instance, if you want to add related works, if you want to revise the description or abstract or the keywords, the one biggest problem is changing authors. So please, please, please make sure all your authors are there when you publish it, because that is difficult to change the authorship because that's associated with the DOI. It's kind of pretty formal. So, but a lot of this amends, we often get requests, ooh, I want to change this. I want to add that, and now you can do it on your own. And that happens in that publish button, if you've published before, where you would hit publish. Rather than just seeing the publish button now, you see that you can also do a version or you can amend the metadata, okay? Now, this currently is available for only the projects that are published under the other data model. It was the simplest to implement at first. We are currently working on it for the experimental, simulation, hybrid simulation, and field research data models. And that will come out this year. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, this was a data set, in fact, that my student and I published. We published it originally last January. So here it says the original data set. We got the paper reviews back. We made some adjustments to the data analysis. So now we have version 2. And if you click on version changes, in fact, it tells you what the changes are. So it explains we submitted it and the revised map using a different statistical analysis. So there's a new version of our VS30 map. Okay, so this will be available for all the projects that have multiple versions. The other thing that, the other two things that we've implemented are data metrics and feedback. So the data metrics, now if you go to each published project and you click on that view data metrics, you can track your data set with respect to downloads and previews. So we just started tracking this in May, so about 4 or 5 months ago. And this is the box that will pop up. You'll get full project downloads. That means if they click that download project button, and then also individual file requests. So either individual file downloads or individual file previews. So these two sum up to this. And you can see it quarter by quarter. All right, so this is integrated with the Make Your Data Count standard. So everything is counted in a standardized way. And so now you can see how well your data set is doing in terms of being downloaded and then ultimately reused at some point. The other capability that we've added is a feedback button. It may actually be moving because it's a little bit lost here, but often you may be working with a data set, and for instance, it's clear that channel 7 had some problems. There's some errors. It's bad data. It looks like it was unplugged. It was disconnected during the experiment. Or there may be other issues, or there may be questions. And so if you click the leave feedback button, this window will open. Your name will be populated. You leave feedback here. And then this could be feedback to DesignSafe, because this will go to our data curator and she will kind of channel it to the right person, or it could be to the authors themselves, and we'll make sure the authors get that feedback. And then they maybe will make a revision or an amends based on that feedback. Something else that we've implemented and in the last year is a micro survey about data download. And we are constantly being asked, well, how are people reusing your data? What are they doing? And it's hard, we can look at data citations. Certainly that's one indication of how data are being used, but it doesn't really represent the plethora of ways people are reusing data, and it's a lagging indicator. And so if you are downloading data from DesignSafe and a micro survey pops up, please take it. It only pops up for every 7 to 10 downloads for anyone downloading. So you shouldn't get it every time you try and download something. But this is a way to help us understand what people are doing with the data. And it is truly a micro survey. It is 3 questions long. So reasons you're downloading data from DesignSafe. So why are you downloading this data set? Did you participate in collecting or publishing this data? So we want to understand if you are completely independent from the data publishers, or are you part of the publishing crew? And then what is your professional level? So are you an undergrad student? Are you a practicing engineer? Are you faculty? What are you? So these are pretty easy. And then if you would like, you can add some additional comments about downloading processes, anything about the data that you're using. So I know when I often get one of these pop-up micro surveys, I ignore it, but I'm not ignoring it when it comes from DesignSafe. So please, we are really interested in how people are reusing data. So a few other things that we're doing, and we've done this year to incentivize data publishing, is first that we had our first inaugural set of Dataset awards. 4 datasets were selected from those that had been published before December of 2020. And these 4 projects are listed here. They represent a diverse set of data sets. We've got different hazards indicated. You can see we've got some liquid earthquakes. We've got some wind engineering projects. We've got geotech represented. We've got structural engineering represented. We've got coastal engineering represented. And in fact, we also have experimental field research and simulation data sets represented. So we really tried to highlight different projects and different data sets that had been published. And the criteria used to select were the quality of the data, the quality of the curation, and the potential for reuse. And so this will become an annual award. And I encourage you to consider publishing your data set by this December, so you are eligible for the 2022 data set award. The other things that you, as a winner of a data set award, it's more than you do get a certificate, but you probably want more than a certificate. So we are promoting all of the data set winners on the webpage. So we announced the awards here on the front page, and we had a full-length news story on each awardee. And then each awardee was invited to give a DesignSafe research webinar, where the webinar focused not only on the data set, but the research enabled by the data set. So for you as a researcher, this represents an opportunity to promote the work that you are doing. And we're advertising these webinars to the technical community associated with the data set, not only DesignSafe registered users, but if it's a geotech data set, we promoted it through, we have a geotechnical listserv. And so we can bring a broader community to the table to learn about the data and the research. So this really does represent a broader outreach effort regarding your research, your data, and then generally, of course, DesignSafe in general. So let's talk now a little bit about the enhanced user guides. If you have not visited the user guide section, I encourage you to do so. They are going to continue improving and evolving. So the user guides are now organized separately for the Data Depot and the tools and apps section. So you can see under the Data Depot, on the left side here is mostly things related to your day-to-day managing of data. Notice we added this experimental facility checklist. So for those of you doing experimental work, this helps you understand what are your different roles and responsibilities during your project. Then over here is all the curation and publishing guidelines, some best practices. A neat thing that we initiated a few years ago was curation office hours with Maria Esteva, our data curator, where she'll meet with you and talk over your data set before you curate it to help you answer any questions and provide some guidance, etc. So all of this stuff related to the Data Depot is up here. I will mention that the curation office hours have been so successful, we've decided to expand them to also have what we're calling workspace office hours, where that will not only deal with any Data Depot issues, but predominantly the tools and apps section. How can I better use Jupyter? Wait, how do I find these files? What's the best way to use the HPC applications? And we'll have those staffed for folks to visit starting sometime in October. The other thing I would like to mention, I mentioned already about how to cite data. One way that we are using to cite research that has been enabled by DesignSafe is the fact that we published this marker paper in Natural Hazards Review in 2017. And so we ask you to cite that paper in any of your papers that made use of DesignSafe resources, whether that's data, HPC resources, cloud resources, etc. If you scroll down in the user guide down to the tools and applications section, you'll see here we've got information on the various types of applications, the Jupyterhub, Recon portal, and then some advanced information on the Tapas API that underlies the entire cyber infrastructure. I do want to mention a bit about the application. So within the tools and applications section, this is what you'll see. The applications are organized on these different tabs. And the data depot browser here, so you can find data either in your projects, my data, or even published. But something that we added in the last year to better integrate the SimCenter tools is now we do have a tab that is associated with all of the SimCenter tools. And the SimCenter tools, of course, are in downloadable format as well. But actually, many of these tools can be accessed through our API, the Tapas API, and can be integrated into various workflows in Jupyter. And so we encourage you to think about that, and I'll talk more about that with respect to our use cases. The other thing to mention is there are some interactive applications in our workspace. For example, GID, for those of you who create different types of meshes, STKO similarly for OpenSeas, ParaView, Poetry, and there's even interactive MATLAB. Some of these have had some pretty slow performance through our virtual connection, and we've improved that. And so if some of these tools that are interactive, you're interested in using, and perhaps you weren't happy with the performance in the past, I encourage you to check them out and see if they are better suited and better performing now. And if they're not, send me an email because I want to know. But we've been doing some testing and things seem to be improved quite a bit. So I'm happy about that. The other thing to mention here is Jupyter. Jupyter is a huge piece of DesignSafe with our cloud-based Jupyterhub. And so now this Jupyter guide has a lot of information for very practical information like which Python packages are already installed, how to add other packages that you may be interested in adding, how do you properly call the path to find different files, properly ending your Jupyter session, and there's some example Jupyter notebooks for different applications that are listed too. So this Jupyter guide is improved and will be improving over the next year. So let's talk a bit more about the Jupyterhub and enhancements. There's been numerous upgrades that are completed, some are in progress, that is helping us make Jupyter the primary analysis platform. The way I like to think of Jupyter is it's kind of that middle ground. There are some folks who will feel very comfortable to SSH into the command line, create their scripts there, and run their workflows there. There are others who don't want to go down to that level. And plus, when you're doing, there's only very specific things you can do from the command line. If you can, say, do some of that work in Jupyter, you can also do the pre and post processing, kind of bring your whole workflow into one place. So I'll talk a bit more about how we see Jupyter representing that middle ground between using the portal of just running one simulation, going to the command line, running a bunch of simulations, where it fits there in the middle. We've added some new hardware and software for the back end because we've seen some usage and memory issues with respect to what people are trying to do. And we've also added the support for the creation of custom images. So for instance, if you need a Jupyter image that has more storage, more memory, there are certain package dependencies, and you don't want to have to always be pip installing the new packages, we could create an image for you. We can also allows us to target various types of hardware. For instance, if you're interested in accessing GPUs for your machine learning or AI algorithm. And so, you would, for most users, they won't see this. But if you submit a ticket or contact me, we can set up an image for you And when you come in, you'll be able to find a specific images that are available to you, and you can open them for your work. So again, something new that we'd love to work and help you with. So now let's talk a bit more about Jupyter as a workflow engine. As I mentioned, it represents a powerful middle ground where you can develop your full workflow, starting from the pre-processing of input files, maybe some preliminary data analysis that represents that goes into the HPC job. Then you can submit jobs to the HPC system through Jupyter. So one thing to keep in mind is all the apps in the workspace can be called through our API Tappis. And so you can call that from the Jupyter notebook. So you can submit jobs to the HPC system, or you can simply utilize the virtual machine resources on the Jupyterhub to do your analysis. So that's in the Jupyter notebook. And then the post-processing and data integration is also in the Jupyter notebook. So it's really all in one place. We realize that, you know, more advanced languages like C++ are the language of choice if you really want to be efficient in writing code for the HPC system. But Python is very user-friendly and really useful, kind of more on this broad brush of putting a workflow together. So I'm just going to give you two examples of, and one of these I think I talked about last year, of what we mean by a workflow that uses Jupyter. Brady Cox and Joe Van Tassel, and Joe just started working for us at DesignSafe and TAC, developed the SWBatch tool, which does surface wave inversions to develop shear wave velocity profiles from dispersion data. And this utilizes a program called Geopsy that's installed on our HPC system. But developing all the input files, running it, looking at the output was always very cumbersome. They would use Excel spreadsheets to develop the input files. It was really difficult. But they developed a Jupyter-based workflow as well as a Python package to facilitate use. So they pre-process the dispersion data, they set up the input files in the Jupyter notebook, they submit a Geopsy job using Tappis. The output then is saved to the data depot, and then the post-processing happens within Jupyter. So here's SWBatch in the tools and applications section, but we don't use it from the web browser. In fact, it's called from the Jupyter notebook. Here's where their Jupyter notebook is creating the inputs, and here's the visualization of the outputs. So again, a one-stop shop of the workflow. And importantly, by having the full Jupyter notebook, you have an opportunity to revise the workflow relatively easily. So another example from my work was some work that we just recently published with Margot Durante, where we developed a machine learning model to predict liquefaction-induced lateral displacements from liquefaction-induced lateral spreading. So, you know, we had 7,300 data points that we trained the model from. So they were displacement data from the Christchurch earthquake where lateral spreading happened. So these colors represent the observed displacements that we derive from optical image correlation. We had subsurface data from cone penetration testing from the New Zealand geotechnical database. We integrated all of this and developed random forest models to predict displacement. These are just two examples of the regional displacement predictions from two different models, one that did not use CPT, one that did use CPT data. And so you can see the differences there, which are actually relatively modest. But the key thing was these models were all developed in Jupyter and published in DesignSafe with all of the Jupyter files available. So for instance, here's the published data set. So you can see we've got in this folder, the Jupyter notebooks that we used in model development are there. If you want to now use the model, those models, you can't just, you know, write an equation in a paper. You need the script. So within this folder, we have Jupyter notebooks that allow you to use the model and then other segments include how we did the regional assessment of the model. But again, we use scikit-learn within Jupyter. You can see we've got our entire grid search across all of our hyperparameters to develop the random forest model. We did our k-fold validation, cross-fold validation, all within the script, all within Jupyter. And all of this she could train 10 different models at the same time in 10 different notebooks because she wasn't doing it locally. So scikit-learn is available in our Jupyterhub, Keras, TensorFlow. So for those of you who are doing AI and machine learning, you know what those things are. And so this is something that we're really going to want to build on over the next year and really encourage users to take advantage of. And all of this really fits into this broader concept of research reproducibility. The idea that others should be able to reproduce your work. And for computational work, that means dealing with all the elements of provenance, the data itself, which I think many of us clearly understand, but also the full computational steps and the computational environment in which these steps were run. So, Jupyter to run your Jupyter notebook. Or did we use, what Python, which operating system, etc. All three of these go together to creating a reproducible experiment. And the NSF Advisory Committee on Cyber Infrastructure, on which I sit, has a working group on reproducibility, really trying to promote this in the broader technical community, where we want to promote reproducible computational results. But realizing for you as researchers, this is not something waits to have at the end of the project. You need to plan and think it through well, starting from the beginning of the project. We want to provide cyber infrastructure tools that can assist in capturing the required information to define the provenance, and we all need to just better understand it. We need policies and incentives to providing this information. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about the DesignSafe use cases. There are 10 or so use cases that we are developing with members of the research community funded on our project. They are projects that utilize various aspects and capabilities of DesignSafe with the goal to demonstrate to you how DesignSafe can be used to enable unique and transformative research, but with this domain-specific examples. We want to inspire others to incorporate DesignSafe in their research. And importantly, we are going to start publishing products associated with the use cases that you can use. For instance, Jupyter Notebook templates, documentation, descriptions. You can see, for instance, the machine learning a training algorithm that we use. We can provide templates of that so others can build off of them. These are our use case projects, and those who are leading them from various institutions and different domains. So a lot of them deal with open seas, machine learning, uncertainty quantification, some visualization, large-scale simulations. So as you look at this list and see the names and perhaps see areas of interest to you, keep your eye out, because we will be developing descriptions and information and documentation for these so that you can build off of them. So they are being developed and we'll find a home in the user guides over the next 6 to 9 months. So moving on to the Reconnaissance portal, I mentioned this is a way to identify archived data sets. Each of these pins represent events for which we have published data sets. Here's just an example from Hurricane Michael in 2018. The push pin is here where the event happened. And in this case, so many data sets, you have to scroll down. Each of these are a link, most of them, but not all of them, to data sets in the data depot that you can then use in any a multitude of ways. In fact, this is the STEER data set that represented one of the dataset awards for 2021. Now, although this looks like a map, all the map has is the push pins. If you want to start looking at the geospatial aspects of data sets, we've developed a program called HazMapper, which is an interactive map viewer. You can put in images, GPS tracks, point clouds, videos. You can import GeoJSON files. And last, in April of 2020, we did a webinar with some of the enhancements that we developed. So again, you can, this is in some ways has similar capabilities as Google Maps. So in terms of adding base maps, but things that others can't do. You can have point clouds where you can say, this is where the point cloud is. I want to go look at the point cloud. And there's various files from the data depot that you can incorporate. So again, here's an example. Each of these are pictures that were collected in the field. The metadata that was collected with each photograph is exposed when you look at the photo. Here's an easy access to point cloud data where you can click on this. This indicates that we have point cloud data. It pops up here, and if you hit this view button, Poetry is opened automatically, and you can start playing around with it. Now, two things that we've added or are adding and hope to implement this fall. One is a tool called Taggit, which is a tool for grouping and tagging images. This is developed as one of our use cases by Fred Hahn at Calvin University in collaboration with our internal HazMapper team. And so you load up a bunch of images from your Reconnaissance, and then you assign different groups to these images. So for instance, you may say, well, it's got a building and it's got a vehicle in it. And so each of these different colors represents a different group, and hovering will show the group name. Now then, when you go to that group, then there are other metadata descriptions you can provide. For instance, in this case, the degree of damage to this service station. Okay, so in this case, 100%. And then when that image is imported, all these tagged images can then be imported into HazMapper. And this is a different image, but here's an example of an image with the various group and metadata information exposed. So we're looking for this to take the use of imagery for data analysis to the next level, because now all these tagged images, not only can you view them in the HazMapper, but you can download a CSV file that describes all of the metadata and all the imagery and tags, and therefore then that could be input into a machine learning model, for instance. The other thing that is really exciting is our Streetview integration, because we're seeing Streetview data collection really exploding. And we're doing this work in close cooperation with Rapid to evolve the Streetview capabilities, which are, there's hundreds of thousands images with a Streetview campaign. We looked at incorporating Google Street View, but it's not particularly open. And so we are actually working with a similar organization, Mapillary, but is open source to replicate that type of functionality. Of course, this was all ready to go using Mapillary's API, and then they revamped their API, released version 4, and everything we had created broke. And so we had to make it work with version 4, because they didn't continue to make version 3 available. But it's getting close. So we're close to being able to release this, but the key here is within HazMapper, you see there's a Street View section. You can link to data in Mapillary, in the data depot, or both. And then this is what you'll see. You'll see the path of the Street View vehicle. You'll be able to drive and look at the images. And ultimately, why this is useful is then you find that image that you want to, say, analyze from Taggit, and or however you may want to analyze it, and you can extract that. And so we're looking to release this functionality sometime this fall. So moving on to talk a little bit about the DesignSafe Summer Academy, which just happened this summer. It was a 3-day virtual workshop followed by a 2-day hackathon. This had always been planned to be in person, but because of COVID, we did it virtually. It allowed us to actually serve a lot more people, which was exciting, but of course, being virtual was not as good as being in person. So we'll see how it works next year when we try and maybe do a hybrid approach. But the virtual workshop had presentations kind of in the morning. We had some hands-on exercises and homework for you attendees to do. We had 16 speakers. We used a lot of the use cases as examples. And the topics that we covered were Jupyter notebooks, Python basics, data science, data analysis in the cloud, some machine learning and AI, and then high performance computing and visualization. So we really hit almost all the topics that touch DesignSafe. The hackathon happened the last 2 days, and out of the 70+ researchers that attended the 3-day workshop, 20 participated in the hackathon. So we made 8 projects available. We had 5 teams with 4 folks each, plus 1 mentor per team, and they picked from the different projects. And these were the projects that were done. 2 people did the 2 groups did the physics-informed neural networks, but we had something on deep learning with full waveform inversion, physics-informed neural networks of single degree of freedom oscillator vibration, HPC use for AdCirc, and then automated model calibration for liquefaction using OpenSeas. So 48 hours of coding, plus a lot of coffee, plus DesignSafe, plus Jupyter resulted in some awesome results. At the end of the hackathon on Friday afternoon, all 5 groups presented their work. We had a good group of people listening in, including our NSF program director, and we awarded 2 teams awards based on the work that they did. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but they really learned a lot. So initiatives going into the next year. The Dataset Awards, I've already mentioned, the 2021 Dataset Awards. So get your data published before the end of December and you'll be considered. The DesignSafe Summer Academy will happen next summer. We really hope to combine an in-residence and virtual program, likely in the July timeframe. I mentioned the workspace office hours that will be starting in October. We'll make an email announcement about that once we've settled on some times. We're going to expand our webinars to deal with some of the use cases I mentioned. Maybe having some half-day workshops. That was some of the feedback we got from the DesignSafe Academy workshops is 3 days is a lot. 1 hour webinar on Tapas is too short. What if we did about a half-day workshop? So we'll see, hopefully putting some of that together. And as I mentioned, in our effort to really push the envelope on using Jupyter, you'll see some use case descriptions and documentation and Jupyter templates coming from there. I'm just going to finish up talking about the Learning Center. The Learning Center does not only represent DesignSafe, it's for all of NHERI, but if you go in there, you'll see lists to registering for various workshops and webinars. So you can see this was today's webinar, but the others that are related to the various experimental facilities. And we have an archive of all the online training workshops. So in YouTube. So if you go to the NHERI YouTube channel, there's different playlists. Here's the one on DesignSafe tutorials, and you can find different things there. So with that, I'm going to hopefully, I see we got one question in the Q&A, but I just want to close by saying that we are here for you. We are available for any of the research that is related to natural hazards. Don't forget Slack. I didn't mention it, but for those of you who have access, and everyone who's a registered user should have access to DesignSafe Slack. So that's one of the best ways to interact with us and the broader community. I just want to remind you to cite data using DOIs in your reference list, as well as citing our marker paper. And I'm very interested in hearing anyone's feedback, ideas, and experiences. So my email is here. That means good or bad. I am very open to hearing not only the good things, but also the criticism, because we really are here to improve the research that you can do. So I'm going to put the webinar, here, the QR code for this webinar here. So if you use this, you can fill out the survey. I'm also going to ask Natalie to put the link in the chat. She looks like she's done it already. And I will see what questions that we have. What were the goals of the hackathons in terms of using the use cases? They did not necessarily use the use cases, because the use cases were in some ways, what's the best way to say it? They're still kind of evolving, but they were predicated on the use cases. So for instance, Clint Dawson's group who are doing AdCirc simulation, their use cases to use ensemble AdCirc simulations to do data consistent parameter inversion. So they invert for various parameters for the AdCirc analysis from some field data. That's a little bit hard to do in a 2-day hackathon. But Carlos was one of the mentors, and he worked with them in terms of developing an AdCirc workflow that used Jupyter to do some analyses, and then doing some post AdCirc visualizations. So that's just an example of how the use cases may be inspired as part of the hackathon. But the use cases were presented as examples of how folks are using DesignSafe as part of the workshop, part of the DesignSafe Academy. All right, so I answered that from Cheryl Ann. Ton, you're welcome. Any other questions? This is not the best mechanism to get questions asked. Folks don't want to type, I guess. I wish that I could just let you all talk and we could. Well, any questions, any feedback? Oh, I think we got another one. Oh, no, we got another thanks. You're welcome, Cheryl Ann. This is the infamous ask a question in class and see how long I should wait to see if there are any more questions. I would love to hear, has anyone used amends or revisions? Natalie, I can let people talk if I want, if they raise their hand or something.
You can check to see if it will allow you to do so. You may have to be signed in as this particular host.
Okay, let me see. So, but I did see a question just came in on the chat. What is the most efficient way for someone who did Reconnaissance for the first time and has no experience with DesignSafe to upload all of the data into HazMapper? So that is and other resources here. Okay, so that's a great question because it brings an issue of big data. Well, and big, and I'm using quotes here as big data, because often when we go to the field, we have lots of images, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images. And the question is how to best upload them. It can be cumbersome to use the web interface to upload to the data depot itself. But we have other mechanisms such as Globus or SFTP that allows you to get those files into a project. And then you open HazMapper and you can import all of the images from your project into HazMapper, and they will automatically populate on the map. And then you can click on them one by one. And if you need more information than that, I can point you in a direction we can have folks work with you, part of the HazMapper group, Ingrid, to work directly with you to help, because I think we'd love to get more feedback on, what are some of the barriers towards getting that data uploaded. Let's see, I think there's another. What are the biggest barriers to people publishing their data? Cheryl Ann, that is a great question, and it's one I'd like to ask folks on the call. I do think the first barrier is people. I think there is a subset of our community that feels like they own data when they collect it, but I think we've kind of moved past that mostly. I think then the next barrier is just fear of the unknown. The word curation is scary. People don't know what that means. They think of a museum curator who walks around in fancy clothes and they're like, what does that mean? What does that mean with respect to data? And I would just say it's not as scary as you think. And we are here to help. And Maria Esteva, our data curator, is very passionate about helping you describe and organize your data so that others can use it. I have now gone to a format within my research group that for every paper that we publish a data set on DesignSafe, so that they kind of go hand in hand. When paper gets submitted, the data and scripts that made that happen are also published. It takes not that much more work. I think the hardest part is just saying, what do I need? How do I organize it? And what do I need to document so others could use this data without emailing me or talking to me? And that just takes a little bit of time, but I would argue it doesn't take that much time. But don't wait till the end. Don't wait till 5 years later to organize it, because then the student's gone and it's hard to remember how it all went together. All right, well, I think that is all we've got. I'm gonna just say, Ingrid, send me an email and we'll get you we want to get gear and all put together for getting your data up there in DesignSafe. We're here to help. I'm gonna stop sharing. And I want to thank everyone again for joining. Please take the survey, help us better understand how we can improve our webinars for you. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.